We're now going to start with our speakers. So I'm delighted to welcome Antonia. Antonia, do you want to just say hello to everybody? And Antonia and I are going to do this as a bit of a conversation.
Hi, everyone.
So, Antonia, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your experience of having a drinking problem.
Yeah, so I'll start. So I think I realized I was using alcohol problematically about 21. So I just graduated from university. I was living in Cardiff at the time, and I was working in a club. And through university, I started smoking weed, and it was kind of like only on occasion. But I started working in this club in Cardiff. And I was coming home every night, like 4 o'clock in the morning, smoking weed. And then I started drinking, and it was this thing to kind of like relax me after a long night. And it was something that I started doing every time I was working in this club. I was coming home every night, smoking weed, and I was getting a bottle of wine on the way home, and I was having that to help me sleep. And then it kind of crept into not just on nights I was working, it was like every night, just to enjoy with my housemates. It was, yeah, it started being something that I was doing every day. And that like carried on for a long time. And I kind of knew it was a problem because I was in this like young kind of going out phase. I was like, it's cool. You know, I didn't think it was a huge problem. In the back of my mind, I was like, I am doing this every day. But it felt like I was going to stop once I got like a proper job or something like that. And I think as well, what stopped me is like, I didn't really feel like an addict. So I had a job, I had a house, I had a car. I was really well for myself. Afterwards, I got a job at an office. So I was working in the daytime, which was completely different. And then I noticed I was still coming home every night. And then I was kind of opening a beer to unwind, relax. Then I was going on to the wine. I was still smoking my weed. And it became kind of like a ritual for me. It was something to do like every night to get to sleep, and I needed it. And this carried on for a long time. This carried on all the way through the time I lived in Cardiff. And then it was getting worse. Obviously, I was eating more and more and more. So I was kind of doing the thing where I buy 2 bottles of wine and I drink from both of them. So I couldn't see. I was kind of hiding from myself how much I was drinking. And then I was waking up every day and feeling even worse. And then in the evening, I was getting more and more drink, and then in the morning feeling even more worse, feeling worse all day, coming home, drinking earlier on in the evening. And then I took a break from work just to go on holiday. And I think when I was on holiday and I was around my friends, I couldn't really drink as much as I was normally drinking. And I had this horrible anxiety through this entire holiday. And I was like, well, maybe I've got, you know, something like mental health problems, like anxiety. I didn't know at the time what it was. I was kind of withdrawing. I wasn't drinking the same amount because I was too embarrassed to drink that much in front of my friends. So I was having all these panic attacks on holiday. So I came home, I went to the doctors, and I was like, I think I have like an anxiety problem. I've been having panic attacks. And my limited understanding of that was like, they were going to give me some tablets and I could carry on as normal. I didn't really relate the fact that it might be the alcohol. Mm-hmm. I remember being asked at the time at the doctor's, like, how often do you drink? And I said, oh, I drink every day. And she said, well, if I prescribe you these tablets, which were antidepressants, then you need to stop drinking. I don't think I was ready to really be honest about how much I was drinking every day. So I was like, yeah, that's cool. Took the prescription from her, never gave the prescription in. I think I even went straight to the off license when I left the doctors, because I was like, well, I'm going to need more alcohol to go home to because I'm really stressed out, because now I've got this anxiety problem. Like I'd been diagnosed with like general anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of label gave me an excuse to kind of like, I have anxiety, I have this diagnosis. Therefore, when I get home from work, to be able to relax and feel good, I'm going to need to drink. And it became my identity. It's like, this is what I need to do. I deserve it. I feel like crap all day from like this horrible anxiety that I was having. I was coming home and I was drinking quite a lot. And I was starting to notice that it was getting like scary amounts. I think I was still clinging on to this mental health thing. And so me and my boyfriend at the time, we moved away to West Wales, this small village. I thought, move into the countryside, it's going to be lovely, it's going to relax. And it's kind of that thing that people think that if they change this huge lifestyle change and you go somewhere else, you're going to like solve everything. And all it did was isolate me even more. I was living somewhere I didn't know. I was in the middle of nowhere. There was no shop in my village, which was a massive problem for me because I couldn't actually go and buy the alcohol I needed. I didn't know anyone. I was just there on my own with my boyfriend in this like house. And I felt worse and I didn't have a job. So then I was drinking through the day to kind of relax. And just, I felt awful at the time. And that was the only thing then that made me feel better, was drinking. And eventually I did get jobs, and they were kind of jobs in like, I got another job in a bar, I got a job in like a holiday park, and then I was drinking at work. And I think that drinking at work thing was like this pivotal moment where I started drinking all day, every day. So I was living in West Wales and I was waking up in the morning and I was drinking, and I was driving to work, and then I would pack all this like hidden alcohol with me. I was mixing it with like Ribena and Lucozade in like hidden water bottles. I was, telling people, oh, it's my Lucozade, and it was full of wine. So I was drinking all day. I don't even know the right amounts that I was drinking at the time, but I must have just stayed drunk the entire time, all through those years in West Wales. At one point, I started feeling really, really, really ill. I think the people I worked with, they said, you're starting to look really ill, and we're noticing your eyes are going yellow. And I knew what that was, and I was really scared. And I went to the doctors, and it was the first time I'd really opened up and said, I'm drinking all day, every day. And she was like, okay, I'll sign you off work for 2 weeks. We'll take your blood tests. And she didn't prescribe me anything I was like reliant on alcohol. My body was reliant on alcohol, so I couldn't just stop. So obviously I went home and I was carrying on drinking, and I was feeling really, really ill. I was really, really scared. And there was a point where I started vomiting blood, and then I don't really remember much. And then I woke up in intensive care. And then like that was a really scary time for me because I knew why I was there. But it was never addressed. So I was in hospital for a month. I was really lucky to even be alive. I remember all my family being there. I didn't know at the time they'd kind of come to say goodbye to me, but they were all really shocked because they didn't know how much I'd been drinking because I'd hidden it so well. I was in hospital for a month. Throughout this time, I was only ever treated for like my body. I was never treated for the addiction. And so when I left hospital, I remember the doctor saying to me, oh, well, you've had such a big scare and you're so lucky. You're not going to drink again, are you? And I was like, no, obviously not. So I went home, returned to my exact same life, but without this coping mechanism that I developed and loved. And it was the only thing that was going to like make me feel better. So I had the exact same life without, basically the love of my life, which was alcohol. So obviously I was going to drink again at some point, but it was completely different because I damaged my liver and I was going into blackout. I was living this like chaotic life where I was driving around in West Wales. I was kind of trying to go to work. I couldn't remember anything. My boyfriend at the time was like, didn't know what to do with me. And he was just finding me, taking the drink off me, pouring it down the sink and thinking I was just going to stop. I think at that time I really, really needed like proper help. I think I needed some kind of intervention.
Can I just stop you there, Antonia? Because I mean, you described sort of this long period of your life where your drinking became more and more problematic without people really understanding that's what was happening. Yeah. And I remember when we talked before, you described really nicely what happens in terms of what sorts of things people did that actually really helped in the end, and what in a sense what your advice might be about actually how do you listen to somebody who has this this sort of real alcohol problem, and what sorts of things really help and what sorts of things really don't help and what get in the way.
So I think I never felt safe being able to open up and be honest with how much I was drinking. And I think eventually when I ended up at rehab and a detox center, I was around other people with that same problem. And it was openly talked about. And that was the first time ever I'd been allowed to openly talk about like my alcohol addiction. It was the only time I'd ever used the word addiction. It was the only time I'd ever said, oh, I'm an alcoholic. And it was amazing, and I felt safe, and I was able to express myself, and I was able to be around people that like there was that shared experience. So I think that helped me. I started going to like AA meetings, and I had this like whole stigma of them in my head. And there I sat, I listened, and I started realizing that I wasn't that special. That when you hear everyone else's story about their addiction, you're like, oh my God, they're saying the exact same thing as what I've been doing. I'm not that special. And it's amazing to feel like that, because you feel less alone, you feel less isolated. You also feel like your behavior isn't this awful thing that you've only been doing. It's kind of like I was like, oh my God, I'm a typical like alcoholic, I'm a typical addict. And yeah, I think that really helped me. It's the identification with like other people.
And that you described very well that 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 the stigma exists both within yourself and presumably with other people as well, and that sort of fear of being able to say, actually, this is what I'm doing, because there's what there's assumption that somehow, I don't know what you think people might think, but the ability to be able to say this is actually what's happening was really very important. Were there other things that helped you helped you being able to talk about what was going on, or indeed are there things that people did that were unhelpful?
There was a time where I was going into A&E a lot, and I think that I started being recognized in A&E, and it was the kind of impatience around that, and a kind of like, oh, it's you again. I think there was a lot of pain I went through with treatment. Like they thought that if I got treated quite roughly and with a lot of pain, that might scare me into not doing it again. And it was, I already felt terrible. I already felt like the worst person on earth, even being there. And it's like being treated like that, it makes you feel invisible, and it makes you feel like a problem, and it makes you feel shamed, and it makes you feel judged, and you just, like, I was doing that all by myself already, and I kind of didn't need the people that I thought might be able to offer me help doing that for me as well. I was already having a really bad time. Yeah, and I don't think I was ever referred to, even if I'd been referred to like the AA helpline and I could have called someone, they could have taken me to a meeting, and I could have had that experience then where I was like, oh, I need this identification, I need to be with kind of like my people. If I'd had that experience then, that would have helped me. I still felt really alone.
Yeah. And that makes absolute sense. And you say you're sort of doing this for yourself anyway. And just lastly, in the last sort of minute, I remember you talking very powerfully about the organization that you had gone to, and some of the things that you did, which were really about you, not about your addiction, that you found very helpful.
Yeah, so I ended up moving to London, and through various like day projects that I was getting involved with, I was referred to a charity called Foundation for Change, and they run it's called Psychology for Change course, and it doesn't really focus on addiction. All the people there have a shared history of addiction, but you kind of learn psychological theory and you apply it to yourself. So you learn not about the addict that you are, but about the person you are, and you put yourself in the context of your own life and how it turned out. And it gave me such a fresh understanding of who I was. I learned about like trauma, I learned about like attachment, I learned about how my childhood had this major impact on who I was, how I saw myself. And it kind of released that shame and stigma, and it gave me a lot of peace to who I was, and way more understanding than, like, I saw myself beyond an alcoholic or an addict. I saw myself as like Antonia, which was the most amazing and liberating thing I ever did for myself.
And I think that's a really lovely moment to finish with, because that sort of, that actually you saw yourself as Antonia, and the addiction was perhaps one bit of where you were, but it was not the whole description of who you are. And that sort of sense that positive input of the bits of you that are not the addict, in a sense, were really, really helpful. And Antonia, thank you so much for sharing that. It's very moving and powerful personal story. And yeah, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
So we're going to move on now to hear from Angela. Angela has been a volunteer at Al-Anon for, was it 25 years? Quite a long time.
20 plus.
20 plus. So Angela, would you like to tell us a bit about Al-Anon and about your experience?
Yes, thank you, Sian, and thank you, Antonia. That was really moving. Yes, I'm firstly a member of Al-Anon family groups, and anybody who volunteers for Al-Anon, it's the kind of requirement to be a member, because unless somebody has lived with a problem drinker, they don't really know what it's like. They don't know the difficulties, and they don't know, as Antonia was saying, her boyfriend just didn't know what to do, and they keep trying to do their best to fix the alcoholic, but that's actually not possible. It has to be the alcoholic who reaches out and finds help for themselves. So Al-Anon family groups came out of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, when it was first formed in America, probably 70 years ago, I think. And it was started by two doctors who both were addicts, and they found that if they supported each other to try and stop the drinking, then that worked. And so they encouraged others to join them, and then that worked. And after a few months, their partners realized that the fact that their prayers had been answered and the alcoholic had stopped drinking, actually, it didn't make any difference to their lives. Their lives didn't suddenly get easier and wonderful, and this person was not sort of being a very functional partner. And so they started Al-Anon family groups to see how they could make their own lives better, whether the alcoholic was still drinking or not. And it was just to sort of manage to focus on themselves and to stop focusing on the alcoholic, because the worry for them was that, oh, if I upset this person now, are they going to go back to drinking? It was not being able to trust that the program was working. But in lots of cases it does work for the drinkers. So Al-Anon itself, we have a head office in London which has about 4.5 equivalent full-time employees, who will have all been members first. They will have been group members and then gone on to apply for those jobs that are paid. The office is an administrative office, really. There are around 800 groups around the country, Al-Anon groups, and they're a fellowship of relatives and friends of alcoholics who share their experience in order to solve their common problem. And it is a self-help program. And it's, as Antonia was saying, it's the feeling of being actually with people who actually know what's going on with you, who understand, and just that feeling of warmth that you get from at last knowing that people understand what you're going through.
And Angela, and
yes.
You said to remind you at the point to maybe tell us a little bit about your experience before we hear from Sofia.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Sian. Yes. Time goes so quickly,
It does.
So much to say. Yes, yeah. And so my experience was the alcoholic in my life was my second husband. I didn't get involved with him until till I was in my late 40s. And so I'd had a lot of life without any involvement or known involvement of alcoholics sort of close to me, and I'm so grateful for that now. I knew before I married him, I knew he'd had a problem with alcohol. I knew he had been to AA. He also had depression, and he drank heavily, but you know, the results of that were never too disastrous, really, in the sort of, I don't know, 2 years I knew him before we got married. It was, yeah, I assumed really that once we got married, he'd be so happy that he wouldn't need to drink anymore, or, you know, drink unsociably anymore, or take antidepressants. And how naive was that, really? You know, I just had no idea of how difficult life would become with him. The main thing I think for me was that I sort of withdrew from my family and friends, because often the scenes when he was drinking were embarrassing, and sort of with his family and friends, I knew that they all knew about his drinking problems, and yet they still loved him, but they managed it for themselves. You know, there were lots of parties that we knew were going on but weren't invited to because those people didn't want him acting up at the party. And he got very angry when he drank, angry at the world, really, angry at the system, angry at politicians, not necessarily angry at me, but it was usually at night when he drank. So I was the only person there to absorb that anger, and to him, when he was drunk, I just represented the rest of the world, which he had a huge amount of issues with. My first introduction to Al-Anon was actually going to an AA meeting with him, and I was just so amazed by the honesty and warmth that was around this room, and the love and the support that the members of AA gave to each other. And somebody told me about Al-Anon, said you should go to Al-Anon, and so I found my nearest meeting, and yeah, it was just so comforting knowing that people felt like I did, and that I could just go and I could just go and listen, really, which was wonderful. And I learned so much from other people's experiences. I learned how to put in boundaries about not accepting unacceptable behavior from my husband. I learned to sort of separate him from the addiction. So I still loved him. He was a wonderful person, but I hated his behavior. The drinking turned him into a monster, which he wasn't. He wasn't a monster. He was just affected by alcohol. I did put in boundaries that, I got a lot of verbal abuse, but one of my boundaries was that, I wouldn't accept him if he was physically abusive. And as time went on, I began to get less confident that he wouldn't be physically abusive. And then I took steps to extract myself. And in fact, I left the house. So I left him and the problem, him and the alcohol, and I went to live somewhere else. And but we still stayed married. We still stayed, as a couple, but living apart. So I got away from the alcohol, which was great, and I could, be with him when he was sober, which was great.
And Angela, can I just sort of capture, in a sense, some of what you said, which really chimes, I think, with some of the things that Antonia was saying about that sort of finding a place where there was acceptance, where there was a shared understanding, where there was, I think you used the word warmth around the meetings, and that you're then consequently not on your own. I know that you're going to introduce Sofia in a minute. And is there a sort of final word that you'd like to say, just in terms of sort of anything again that you'd like people to take away as a sort of key thing to think about?
Yes, I would like people to know that we exist, especially in the healthcare professional and volunteer organizations, because we're not well known. People who see our sort of public information posters and things tend to assume that we are AA because of our name, and we're stuck with that. We can't change that. So, you know, first, we exist.
Yep.
Second, we are not AA. And the third, that there's no, if people sort of introduce the fact that they know there is this organisation, Al-Anon Family Groups, that exists, there's no further involvement to them. All they need to do is to just suggest that they phone our helpline, which is free from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, every day, Christmas Day included. There's no further sort of involvement for the professional, and just say that it might help you. Yeah, we just want to reach out to as many people as possible, and I'm so grateful to have this chance to be here.
Okay, thank you so much, Angela. That's, I mean, really lovely to make sure that people know about Al-Anon, and again, thank you so much for sharing you know, a part of your life which must have been tough.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. Yeah.
And so I think you were going to introduce Sofia. Yes,
I'd like to introduce Sofia, who I've only known through Zoom, really. Sofia, I still go to a meeting in Oxford on a Monday night every week, and we had to go online and use Zoom instead of meeting in person. And Sofia came and joined our Zoom group, and for us it kind of worked not quite as well, didn't quite get the warmth from Zoom as you do in a meeting where people are present, but I think, you know, Sofia has had help from being with us, so I'll hand over to Sofia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, and hello. Yeah, it's so in my life I have quite a few relatives. It turns out it's my dad is an alcoholic. My eldest sister was an alcoholic, sadly passed away 2 years ago. My now husband is an alcoholic, though in recovery, and thankfully I've never seen him drinking, as he's been sober for 5 years. So before I met him, and it was actually him that encouraged me to go to Al-Anon, because he said, even though I'm not drinking, I'll still seep out some of my behaviours, you know, even when I'm sober. And so I went to Al-Anon properly and seriously about 3 years ago, and I had tried in my early 20s, but I was convinced I hadn't had any problems really growing up, that alcoholism hadn't affected me. It was my loved one's problem. You know, and I just had no insight back then. I was really in denial about the effects that my loved one's drinking had on me. So yeah, and I mean, my dad, they've all been very different experiences in relationships, and so my dad, it kind of felt like he was living a double life, because on the one hand, he was very successful. He ran a solicitor's firm from our family home, and he later became a judge. And you would never know on the outside that he was, you know, really, really drinking, that my mum, in fact, was often picking up the pieces and, for example, cancelling his clients if he'd passed out on the floor because he'd been drinking on occasions. And I think what perhaps people might not realise is that he wasn't drinking every day. He could go quite long times without drinking, but then he'd just binge, and it would usually be right before an important thing, whether it's, you know, a family holiday that we really wanted him to be sober for, or anniversary, birthday. And I even remember he was due to give a talk actually at my a college that I was at, so in front of all my tutors and peers, and right before he got really drunk, you know, before he was due to go on. And so it's just this sense with him of unreliability and just a real kind of disappointment and emotional absence with my dad. You know, he was never physically violent, or you know, could verbally be snappy and not nice, but it wasn't maybe the stereotype you might have of an alcoholic, but it just left a real real question of why is he like this, and is there anything I can do to stop it? And I remember being like my mum's little sniffer dog, looking out for the bottles or the the cans that he was drinking. And then for my sister, she was my oldest sister, and again, real sense of sadness, because there were flashes of the wonderful person she was, kind, caring, very talented. Worked in South America for 11 years for Indigenous people, but she really struggled with her illnesses, both alcoholism and also bipolar, and she sadly took her own life two years ago, and so she had many different things affecting her health, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, is it the mental illness that's making her do this? Is it the alcoholism? Is it what part of it is her? And kind of impossible answers, but I do know her drinking really went hand in hand often with the times that were most difficult of her illness, and made things worse. And I remember being very frightened of her a lot of the time, and it kind of feels like seeing your loved one through thick ice, where you can just about make around the edges of the loved one, but you can't reach them, they can't reach you. And there's that sense of not being able to connect, but knowing that once you could connect years ago, and trying to get that relationship back. And I think what really featured in my life was, again, trying to figure out what can I do to make them better, not realizing that there's nothing really I could do to make her become sober. And I would try everything from, I should be more persuasive, like, to her. I should try and tell her more how I felt, or tell her that I love her more, or be harsher, try everything. I, would pray, and but I couldn't see that it was completely out of my hands. And also, what a big obsession it was in my life. What's Caroline doing? My sister, what's she up to? And obviously there'd been very traumatic instances when she'd been really unwell, that just led to a real preoccupation, so that I couldn't really get on with my own life.
Can I just ask, Sofia?
Yeah.
So just in terms of thinking about sort of, is there any sort of key message you would like people to take away? Because again, you describe a, really painful story. And are there any things that you would like people to make sure that they've heard, just as we finish off this section?
Yeah, I think perhaps for professionals coming in contact with family members. I mean, I never did. It was very much a private, behind closed doors thing, which was unintentional. It just never occurred to me to ask for help or to mention it to anyone, because it was normal. It was just normal life. And I think relatives have a really high threshold for disaster, and they just see it as normal. And I know there's not a great, as Angela said, the main thing I think that would have helped, if ever I had encountered a professional, was to just hear someone say, that must be a really difficult situation. Have you heard of Al-Anon? It's for people in similar situations. Okay. And that would have sown the seed. But I mean, like I say, I did come across Al-Anon, but I just wasn't ready for it. And so I think sowing the seed, just knowing it's there, then allows someone to find it when they're ready. Okay. And I think what's not helpful, which I'm sure people wouldn't do anyway, but there's already amongst, I feel in my own experience, a sense of real responsibility, of guilt, and of wanting to fix it. And so any suggestion of someone saying, oh, make sure they stay in rehab, make sure they take the medication, don't let them drink, I'm sure no one would say that, but that would really feed into it and be like, right, it's my responsibility, my job, and carry it on. And I think what many what I know from my parents, this idea of enabling, in the sense that whilst there's no right answer, for my sister, for instance, they were letting her, paying her rent, paying everything, letting her live with them at points when she'd be like screaming at them, scrawling red letters on my mum's books, and there was just no consequence, and so no opportunity to hit rock bottom or try a different approach. And I think many, you know, that just didn't. Sometimes a cruel to be kind is something that doesn't even occur in our alcoholic family.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sofia. Again, you know, really thought-provoking and brave to share, you know, all three of our speakers, very personal experiences. So thank you very much. And we're going to come back to Q&As in a minute. And I'm just going to now ask Lucy. Is Lucy there?
Yes.
Hello, Lucy.
Hello.
So Lucy, as Douglas mentioned, is from Manchester Metropolitan University. And I'm just going to suggest that the rest of us turn our cameras off for this. So if Sofia and Angela and Amanda turn their cameras off, and then we'll let Lucy talk to us a bit about experiences of working with people with substance use issues.
Yes, hi, thanks, Sian. Yes, I'm with Manchester Metropolitan University, and I work with Amanda, who's on the call now as well, Amanda Clayson. And we've been doing some research into substance use recovery for quite a long time now, at least 8-9 years, something like that. And our first project that we started was exploring what recovery, the experience of recovery with a group of people from Liverpool. And one of the advantages really of linking up with Amanda is that Amanda's not an academic, but she runs a community enterprise and has lots of contacts with grassroots organizations and even people who are not in organizations. So one of the key things that we found that really worked, if I might be skipping a bit here, but what really worked was having that on the grounds intermediary, and it really did help with closing that gap that is we often found between, you know, the university and as an organization and as a power, and people who are seldom heard in research and seldom represented. So we both worked on these projects, and we're now working on projects with for people who are at end of life and have had histories of substance use. So we're in the middle of researching that as well. And Amanda again has been quite crucial in bringing in and engaging people into that process. So that's a brief introduction. One of the things that we did do was at the end of the Liverpool project was came up with a paper that we called "When Two Worlds Collide," and I think that title just sums up how we found trying to work co-productively with two very polarized kind of groups of people who were really coming from two different worlds. One of the questions you've asked, I think, is what do we think the researchers should understand when working with people who we tend to term people with lived experience. So, and I think one of the things is that if you're a researcher and you're attached to a university, or you're a commissioner for research, you really do have to understand that there is this huge power imbalance. That you're going into a social area where you have all the power. That is very intimidating. It's intimidating from the point of view of the people with the lived experience, especially substance misusers, people who perhaps have undergone and are still undergoing ideas of shame, of social exclusion, of feeling powerless. And all of a sudden you've got professor this and doctor that coming in with rules, one of our big bugbears was ethics. That, oh, we can't do this research because you have to fill in this form, you've got to do this consent form, you've got to do, and people were just saying, all I want to do is tell my story. So we as researchers do tend to go in with this package, and I think that we really do need, we as organisations, we need to get over that very rule-based way of working. We need to understand that the motivations are different. That the researchers are motivated there to what, get the publications, do the research, find out the research answers and objectives. And as I say, a lot of the people that we were engaging with did just want to tell their story. One of the elements of fellowship is to help others, and to be able to, to be able to tell your story, to be able to help to do that. And that also helps in that that's part of where the co-production starts to meet. Yes, there are two different motivations here, but if we're working co-productively, that means everybody gets something out of it. So we need to start recognizing that that's where everybody's coming from a different place.
Lucy, can I just ask?
Yes.
I mean, I think that I think that sort of what you're describing is sort of, some things that we absolutely have to recognise, sort of, power imbalance, that actually people are coming from different places, but that really important idea that if you're genuinely going to co-produce, both parties need to get something out of it.
Yes.
Can you expand a bit about sort of, what sorts of things the researchers need their papers and stuff, and what was your experience of what you felt that the people you're working with who had a drug or an alcohol problem, what they got out of it?
I'm gonna suggest Amanda answer that question if she's there. Amanda.
Yeah. Hi everybody. But just tiny little bit of scene setting. So I have lived experience of my own substance use, of familial substance use, and I am a professional. I was a nurse, I'm a teacher, and I think that's one of my just things before I answer specifically that question around not assuming, is not necessarily assuming what somebody is bringing. So sometimes there is an assumption and a reality, depending on people's experience, that this power differential manifests in a particular way, and that what we really need to do is keep people very safe and make it all very gentle, and actually that's a disservice to the process and doesn't really progress us. So so whilst it is an individualized perspective for sure about what each individual's motivations and what people want from it, the bottom line when you actually work that through is people want change. People want the same thing. And I think if whilst it is really helpful to look at the mechanics and the vehicles of people need papers, people need, people want to help. The more I think we can look at it through a lens of that's what a progressive co-productive process actually moves us to. And what that does is it opens things up, as opposed to keeping us in this place of people sharing their story. Absolutely, the sharing of experience is a powerful and profound vehicle, and there are many ways to do that, but what the bottom line is influence and impact, and that is what is often the motivation. Now that might look different for different people, yeah. So somebody might say, Amanda, I just want to have a coffee with you and I don't want to go down this line, but they do want to know that it's made some difference. So the things that, and we can share this outside of this brief slot, that over this long period of time, is that I think we have something very, very, very useful and progressive to share and bring in with other people who are following this path too. So we have developed in a co-productive way. You won't be surprised that I'm wince at things that are described as co-productive as a matter of course, but this is a genuine co-productive process. We're now developing strategies that really, and principles that we are using within the university very slowly, because the system doesn't know how to work with this, but to really start looking at how the lived experience is woven through the research process and the research methodology, and that's the progressive thing of I believe.
That's great, Amanda. Thank you very much. I'm going to interrupt there because I want to make sure we got some time for questions. Lucy, is there a last point that you wanted to make before we move on to the Q&A?
Yes, yes. I think I just want to wrap that up. What Amanda was saying, really, in that I think what we've found that works in trying to be as co-productive as possible is that we can underline it with relationship. It's building that relationship first, and I think what we've both been saying is that traditional research starts with the research question and aims, and what we're saying is that to do co-production, you've got to start with the relationship, the partnership first, because if you start off with the research question, you're setting off on the wrong foot, and you've got all the power back into the university, and the university and the funders are driving the whole process. So I
think that's a really, really good place to stop, because you can apply that not just to research, you can apply exactly the same principle to service redesign, or that if you want to work collaboratively or co-productively, you have to build relationship, and the partnership comes first. I think that's a really nice place to message to have it at the end. So I'm now going to ask all the speakers if they could just put their cameras back on, and we'll have some questions.
Okay, we've got the first question for Antonia. And the question says, thank you for being so open and brave enough to speak to a varied and anonymous audience. And I think that's echoed by a number of different people for all of you, actually. Do you think that clinicians and hospital staff should be able to understand and identify your alcohol problem at an earlier stage? So that's the first part of the question. Would this have been dependent on your being clearer to them as to the extent of your alcohol consumption? So that's the second part of the question. And the final part of the question was it necessary first for you to be open to yourself about the problem before you could be open to support or offers of help, referral to rehab or Al-Anon? Is that okay?
Yeah, so I can only really speak from my personal experience, but I think at the time, for me, when I was going in hospital, I was fully aware I was an alcoholic, I was in crisis, it was chaotic, I needed help. I think if someone had either got someone to come and talk to me from AA or an alcohol and drug worker, I would have taken that opportunity and I would have said, take me with you, help me. I was desperate for it. I was going in there like weekly, so.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Sian, you were going to say something? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, there was a second question, I think around, again, it sort of builds on that idea of, where can you introduce the right services at the right time? And so this is a question really about sort of in general, I suppose, about AA or Al-Anon, or how much partnership has been generated with NHS services, or and how do you get that sort of signposting so that there really is that sort of joined up care when people are clearly struggling? So as any perhaps somebody from Al-Anon or and then maybe Amanda. So Amanda, I think, put her hand up, and then so let's have Angela first from Al-Anon, and then Amanda.
Thank you. Yes, Douglas, could I just say that Antonia wouldn't be going to Al-Anon, she would be going if I don't know whether she did, but you know, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, that's for the drinker. Al-Anon family groups is for the families. Yes, and I'm for Al-Anon. And Sian, your question, I don't know, you tell me, how do we reach out to how do we reach out to the, you know, to the people who come across families where there's an obvious drinker or a possible drinker in the families? You know, how do we reach out to all those groups and let them know just that we exist?
Amanda and then Lucy.
Yeah, based on my experience, there were many engagements along my path to my realization and then action. So the thing that I think is helpful, there are, if you're going down a fellowship 12-step route, which is a very specific path to recovery, it isn't the only one, and I think that's important to know. They're not synonymous. There are very tight boundaries, they're called the traditions, about how that would be managed from, but what that doesn't mean, well, this is it. What that doesn't mean is there is no communication. So absolutely making those connections through that kind of public involvement is a really powerful thing. It's about being clear, this is my place, Angela, about what it is that you're sharing. But there are lots of other routes to support, not just fellowship. And I think that the silence and the lack of awareness is a real problem. So absolutely, being, you know, connecting and getting to know what these boundaries are is a really helpful and productive place to shining a light on this issue and giving people paths to explore themselves.
To a degree, you have answered another question, Amanda. So there is a question around alternatives to the 12-step program, and if there are any other theories or experience around other theories, please do contribute. So from any of the other speakers.
Can I add to the question about the experience in hospital and whether that should have been picked up? I think that's right, that it's not been good. We've gone through various phases of 20 years ago. Hospitals were quite good at it, and then funding disappeared. But we're now in a phase of policy and funding that a lot of hospitals around England are being funded to develop alcohol care teams that work within hospitals. And there's lots of evidence. I work in Manchester, so in Greater Manchester, and Salford has actually had a brilliant model of what works to pick up people going into hospital, even with a broken leg. It doesn't have to be associated with alcohol. That people should be screened, and that there's in-reach into the hospitals from alcohols and other drugs services from the voluntary sector. And up until COVID, that's what was going on in Manchester, that Change, Grow, Live were in-reaching into hospitals. And fortunately, now that they've shown that actually works, that's now going to be funded and rolled out, certainly across some of the hospitals with the highest need, which tends to be Manchester, North East, Birmingham, London, and some places like that. And I think all the more we can show that it's working. There's still going to be gaps, but at least that's promising for the future.
Great, thank you. Now there is another question in the chat in the questions and answers that can easily be answered. So we're going to post a link for the Al-Anon and also Foundation for Change and for other organisations that have been mentioned. So they will come not only in the chat link, but also if you pick up the chat at the end of it. So we will make sure that on our website at Oxford Academic Health Science Network, we have all of those links for you. If you need help and you can't find anything, then by all means do contact us directly through the systems that you came through in order to get to this particular webinar. But Angela, there is a question specifically about West Wales, whether there are any Al-Anon organisations in West Wales, and I don't know whether you can answer that off the top of your head.
I can say that there are not many in West Wales. There certainly are in Cardiff and Swansea, but I don't know off the top of my head where the others are. But that's one of the great things about Zoom, that a lot of the meetings that have had to be on Zoom are now trying, now that they're going back to meeting in the rooms, they are trying to have a hybrid of system so that people who joined on Zoom can still carry on with them on Zoom. So the distances perhaps don't matter so much, but there's not very many meetings in West Wales. But have a look on our website. You can easily find the links there and where the meetings are. And just if I could just say, in answer to Amanda, that for Al-Anon, a 12-step program is just offered. Nobody has to do it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
There's one other question, Charlotte.
I know, I've seen that. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Fine. Okay, you answer it. Oh, you ask it then.
Yeah. I think that there's a question for you, Antonia, which was really about advice that you might give to any other young people who might find themselves in a similar sort of situation.
I would say you need to find the people that you can relate to and be really honest with yourself. Mm-hmm. And go and find those other people that you can talk to and you won't feel shame with them. Like, there's this whole stigma around what AA meetings are. You think them as like they're in church basements, they are people sitting around like really depressed with like cups of coffee. They're not like that. They are welcoming places. People will always welcome you, and you will hear and see a variety of different people, a variety of different experiences, but then they're all the kind of same as well. And just, even if you feel intimidated by that, get someone to go with you. There are open meetings where you can take someone who isn't an addict with you, get someone you trust to come with you, give you some support, and just try it.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're just coming to the end of our webinar, and I'd just like to reiterate the thanks for 5 fantastic contributors, some very personal stories being shared, for which we're just, it's unusual to hear it, and it's very different from to actually have somebody talk about their own experience rather than to sit and read something or to imagine what it might be like. It's much more powerful to hear it from you, so thank you for that. And just, I suppose, the sort of couple of things that I sort of really reminded me to sort of keep at the forefront of my mind when thinking about working with people who might have had an alcohol or a drug problem is that, these are often invisible problems. There's still a huge amount of stigma around it, which leads to a lot of, of shame and worry about being judged. So a lot of it happens in private, behind closed doors, I think somebody said earlier. That families and that don't need to be given the responsibility for fixing this, that actually this is something that people need help with, and that that I think there's that sort of image of your relative being behind thick ice, and you can no longer see and connect with the person that they actually are, which chimed for me very much with that idea that Antonia was talking about when she actually found the help that she really needed, which was actually there's Antonia who's beyond the addiction. There's something that's me that is not just Antonia the addict. And I think that sort of idea of holding that there's a person, and I think that Angela also said the same thing about sort of loving one's husband and hating the behavior. So remembering that the addiction and shame go hand in hand for both families and individuals themselves, and that actually the thing to remember is that there is this is a person that is not the addict. And then finally, if one's going to sort of work with people, then actually understanding that the commonality that is needed to really work in co-production is to understand that actually what everybody wants, whether they're a researcher or whether they're a service manager or whether they are a family member or a patient, is that they want to have influence and impact. And even though the way in which that might be achieved is different, and it might be through telling your story, it might be through writing a research paper, it might be through redesigning the ward, actually everybody, the piece that brings us together is wanting to change things, and that actually in order to do that you have to build relationships. You can't say actually what we need is a bit of input for our research project. Actually what we need is relationship, and it's through the relationship and partnership that you can genuinely co-produce. So thank you all very much. We hope that we will see you at one of our other webinars, and just to say again, it's been really, really interesting and testament to the value.
Okay, Sean's just frozen there. I think she's just saying that it has been great. Technology sometimes gets in the way a bit. The
value of sharing stories, I think, is what I was saying.
Thank you very much for all of your input and your both in the chat and the questions and answers. There are one or two questions which I didn't feel appropriate to ask. So, but if there are questions still there and you still want to have answers, we still have access to all of the speakers today, and we can email them. We will email them for you. So please do send emails through to us in the first instance via Lucy. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you all to our speakers for a very, very enlightening session. And thank you for your honesty. Thank you.